What's going on, everybody? It's Frito here for your Overwatch. New balance patch went to live last night, and as well, I wanted to speak about some current meta trends and how the gameplay of Overwatch has been shaping up. First, though, console players should be overjoyed to finally be seeing particular attention from the developers. A couple console-only changes went through. Again, this is live on the game right now. All these changes are. Ana's biotic rifle has its allied projectile size increased from 0.3 to 0.4. Super important buff, and will make it even easier for you to tap into some of the Overwatch League Ana-related strategies, even on a thumbstick. Another change only to console, Symmetra Sentry Turret now has its DPS reduced from 34 to 30. Hey, wait a second, this is a change I'd like to see on the PC version of the game too. Obviously, turrets are harder to deal with, whether from Torb or Symmetra on consoles. Just the turn speed alone is slower, even when you're at max sensitivity. So it makes sense that they'd have different balancing. They did this in the past to Torbjorn's turret many years ago, successfully, I believe. And this continues that trend. But there's also another larger trend going on where ability power has been taking hits left, right, and center in 2020, whether it's Reaper's Lifesteal, Moira's overall healing, and even further nerfs that we'll get into now. But I would say in general, this goes along with the philosophy that Jeff has gone at length to explain, to try to enable individual playmakers rather than the game be completely about ability management and combos. With that being said, let's get on to the changes that went through on all platforms now. This is console and PC. Brigitte's armor pack gets 2 nerfs, where the heal over time for the armor over shield health goes down from 75 to only 50, and the heal per second gets a very minor nerf by 5, going down to 55 total, down from 60. The developers say on top of the high utility Brigitte brings to her team, she also dishes out a ton of healing and armor. We're reducing some of this healing and armor to help keep her in line with the other healers. I mostly doubt that this is going to change my opinion on Brig's power level. I still think she's a tier 1 support hero, mainly because of the variety of things she can do. Dish out damage, stun, crowd control, remembering that she has Inspire that didn't get changed, which is really strong. But there is a chance that these numbers stack up to equate to remove that sort of unkillable effect teams with Brigitte have, where if you're playing a lower damage character like Tracer or Winston, it used to feel like Brig was really good at keeping your team up against their sustained damage. There may be a bit of a breakpoint for Winston to deal damage. Remember, 55 healing per second on Repair Pack will be underneath Winston's damage at 60 per second, but Brig's also got crowd control and stacks 2 versions of healing at once together, so I'm not so sure it's going to just kill the character in one fell swoop. Most of her value actually comes from holding corners with shield and landing her damage, which also activated her healing aura. Brig's damage is kind of nutty. It's one of the scariest things about her, honestly. Being able to combo damage while healing, not a lot of supports can do that. Not in the numbers that Brig can, especially when everything else has gotten reduced. So try to keep that in mind. Moving on to the next nerf, Symmetra's alternate fire on her photon projector has its damage increased from 120 to 140. The devs say increasing photon projector's max damage allows Symmetra to play more effectively at a safer range when necessary. Symmetra's an interesting pick right now because she saw some great use in the first week of Overwatch League Season 3, but not for her alternate fire. Sim works really well against Mei because she either can teleport the team past the chokes that Mei thrives in, or when Mei tries to split off her team and Sim's stuck behind a wall, she's one of the few characters in the game that don't mind shooting into a Mei wall. In fact, she gets powered up by doing so. You'd still rather be shooting the other team, of course, but having an enemy deployable object for you to shoot at to reach tier 3 charge makes Sim pretty powerful. Now, other than that, Sim's really bad, but to some degree, that's probably an okay place for heroes to be in Overwatch if there are these internal matchup metas that make heroes good. I think that's kind of ideally what you want to see out of the game. My concern is, though, I feel like buff buffing spam is a bit of a slippery slope. On to the next one. Widowmaker gets a pretty significant nerf, honestly, with the scoped shot charge rate, as now the charge time it takes for you to reach maximum damage is 0.9 seconds, up from 0.75, nearly a full second to reach max damage on your Widow scope. The developers say Widowmaker has become stronger over time following changes to other heroes, such as power reductions to barriers. This change is intended to slow down her shots, reducing her overall DPS. That will definitely have this effect, but I think it'll have even more effects than that. So for example, at the old charge rate, if let's say you had 5 seconds to rattle off 3 shots, you had time to charge up, read the animation, and fire in pretty rapid succession, often being able to hit your max damage. With the new change, since there's a delay to all of that, the timing windows on follow-up shots will be harder to land because there will be a bigger gap where you won't do max damage, and maybe that shot's not even worth taking until you do. This means in some cases, Widow having an angle on your team will just be less lethal overall over the course of a whole team fight than it was before, which I assume that part of it is their goal. The amount of damage she does almost when she's uncontested. My concern is how this plays out when she is contested in a straight up duel, 1v1. Hitting those headshots is hard enough already when you have like a soldier running up on you, for example. And it was really only the aim, skill, and speed that allowed Widow to be dominant in the hit scan category, which, yeah, I know some people had problems with, but what's the alternative? That easier characters that don't need headshots take the forefront? Not sure that's what we want, because that's essentially what we had when Soldier was meta for so long in a big section of Overwatch's early competitive life, where Widow was just not viable due to the way she was nerfed and how strong Soldier was, which is fine for me because I love playing Soldier. I'll take that free SR, but I'm just trying to be clear about what the goals of this are and what the effects will be. Yes, in certain metas at the highest tiers, Widow was dominant, but I don't think she was ever really dominant at any level of play in ranked due to how difficult she was to play. So not sure how I feel about this change. We'll have to monitor it over time. The saving grace of this being more fair is that many other things got powered down around her. Hanzo's arrow speed, for example. So there's a chance that I'm worrying over nothing, and the fraction of a second longer may just make her harder to play, but still have the same potential that she used to. Another pretty severe power down nerf is to Wrecking Ball's Pile Driver, where affected players' loss of air control has been reduced from 1 second to half a second. The developers say this change allows Wrecking Ball's enemies to regain control of their movement more quickly to try and avoid attacks, making Pile Driver combos a bit less deadly. One thing's for sure with this, the amount of delay it takes for you to come out of ball form to pull up Wrecking Ball's guns in order to follow up on your own Pile Driver, I think got pretty significantly nerfed with this, as by the time you even go through that action to acquire the target, they're already gaining control, it feels like. And because of that, it's sort of got that Doom Fist effect, where if you remember, they have toyed with the way that the targets hit by uppercut do or don't get away from it. The changes have gone back and forth in that regard multiple times, but overall this is similar, where the follow-up shots from Wrecking Ball or his teammates are both way harder now because the enemy has a window of opportunity pretty quickly after the initial impact to escape. This nerf feels pretty darn severe, but I don't think it will be if they ever get around to nerfing Mei, which I just can't see a world where Mei goes unnerfed forever. They've done little tweaks here or there, but if she drops in power level and ubiquity in the meta, Wrecking Ball's kind of taken over, I think. And again, with power reductions like this, the desired effect of the ability can still be replicated, just the window of time you have to execute it is smaller, which makes it harder to do, but still having the impact that it used to when you do it properly anyway. Well, that's it for the patch notes. Wanted to talk more about the state of the meta, where Blizzard's going, and sort of an update. And I think this new patch adds to the trend that Overwatch has been going through in sort of the power down era in all the best ways. Honestly, it's exactly what I think the game needs, where the abilities and superpowers that heroes have the same potential, but they just need to be more skillfully executed, which I think is great for everybody. Becomes more interesting to play these heroes when they don't feel as free. They're more more rewarding where you don't just win by existing, but you have interactions and plays to make and limits to your power. All that adds for a recipe for player expression to be high, and I feel like it's only gone up as they've gone down this direction and should continue with this patch, and hopefully as they direct attention towards the top level meta, which I want to talk about now. A pretty interesting breakout in the way the game's working right now is at the highest tiers, Ana seems like the biggest playmaker support with the highest peak potential value, which is exactly what we wanted to see. I already felt that way in the ranked context. As I said in my tier list video, felt like she was just carrying games by herself, but in the ranked environment, she might be a little bit more troublesome to play because dive gets ran far more in ranked, oddly enough. And I would say it's actually a bit more viable than it is at the Overwatch League level right now, because you're more often to find positional mistakes of your enemy to exploit with dive, whereas at higher tiers, there just isn't any really, at least not enough in order to make it top meta. But other than a few niche cases, dive's pretty hard to run, and Reinhardt is the best tank, and Mei is still easily the best damage dealer, quote, damage dealer. She's a little bit more supportive or tanky or whatever you want to call her, but regardless, Mei walls alone provide so much value still to every type of engagement that it really structures the way you play, either splitting opponents, blocking off chokes, blocking line of sight, blocking ultimates. It sort of has just every utility tool you need. That combined with the power of D.Va, who can dive, but is typically a bit more successful at an even play style, if not a peeling one. So with all these factors put together, teams are pretty stable in defending their formations, whereas originally in the tier 2 scene, this rushdown playstyle was seeing the most success with Moira. Now the control of the fight has made it a bit more about the impact plays than sustain. This is actually a lesson that was learned pretty harshly in the GOATS era, and this new 2-2-2 version of Brawl emulates some of the principles that were in there. In GOATS, Moira originally was best. Moira allowed you to have the resources to W very hard and run over your opponents, but then developed a more controlling playstyle with Ana, which punished aggression and held its space a bit better, but had those impact cooldowns that could come in. And then eventually it devolved into Zen GOATS mirrors, because Zen had more damage in the mid fight and a stronger ultimate. But if you really wanted to, you could play Moira to run it over, but generally it devolved into the more controlling version, which is why in GOATS, the team fights would last so long, because it ended up being a far more attritional type battle rather than a high impact one. Which brings me to why this meta we're in right now, despite it being rushdown heavy, is so awesome to watch, because there's so many high impact plays that can pop off, whether it be Ana, Earth Shatter, D.Va bombs. There's not as much defense against everything, so no matter what, a crack gets opened in order for some play to be made. And that brings me to the principle that I think is allowing Ana to see more play than Moira right now, that Moira is of course more forgiving, but I think her orbs are just simply easier for D.Va to eat than Ana's utility. Interestingly enough, in this more controlled Brawl variant, Defense Matrix is harder to eat Ana nades than in dive, because if you're diving Ana, she has a very set window of time where she has to use her cooldowns or she just dies. She's on the clock to use nade and sleep, so because of that, you can mask her with Defense Matrix a lot easier, whereas in the more controlled Brawl variant that we're in right now, what ends up happening is the main tank takes some space, they brawl for control and trying to get the better Mei wall, all the while exchanging poke. And D.Va always wants to save Defense Matrix for the most crucial abilities, or saving a teammate who's low. Poor Defense Matrix usage is using it far too early in fights to block damage that's not going to be impactful, and then opening up lanes for abilities to come through. But the problem is, there isn't enough defense in the game for you to play that perfectly anyway. So no matter what, you're going to have to use Defense Matrix early to stop poke damage from killing your Rhine or getting an angle on your squishies. And remember, they nerfed Defense Matrix in a way where it's very clear now, very easy to see when D.Va uses it, and it's got that 1.5 second of delay before you can use it again. In between those windows, Ana can just wait and then launch her cooldowns from afar. Whereas Moira has to use her orb a bit more proactively and spam heavy to get the most use out of it. Back in Double Shield, where there was no diva, Moiras were using orb on cooldown just to try to farm up coalescence as fast as possible. Whereas Ana now has more of a tension point with D.Va, where if you're starting to win the frontline battle, D.Va can put DM over the enemy tank and stop Ana from healing it, sure. But more times than not, there's windows where D.Va has to use DM and then Ana can punish. So that's why I'm trying to emphasize this as a bit more of a controlling style meta. We're playing rush characters, sure, but it's rush via the cooldowns that enable you to rush. It's not rush via Brig and Moira, who can just W at you. It requires the Mei or the Ana or maybe McCree or somebody to land an ability or hit a shot to make an opening for the rush down to happen, which is a much better place for rush to be, in my opinion. It's like skill shot goats, where yes, they're seeing some Reaper in there, but it feels like McCree is a pretty viable pick in that slot as well. And the more characters like this, the higher skill comes from the individual players. Even Reaper right now follows this logic because his plays are about his cooldowns and he can't just stand and deliver, holding his own up against anything like in the old variant. In fact, because he's a bit more average at that, Symmetra, who has way more potential damage standing with her team, is getting used instead of Reaper for that style. But Reaper is more flexible and actually can flank, has a better escape, and all those other things. So overall, really good news for the game, I'd say. And I'll be interested to read your comments in the comment section down below, your thoughts on all of this. I think the proof is in the pudding, so to speak, that the power down has simply just enabled more playmaking and made the game have more impact rather than inevitability with just, well, my character has better stats than yours, so I run at you and win. Like, that's not how the game plays, and I don't think it's going to for quite some time, as long as the balance keeps shaping up to be within the same philosophies. And before I go, I did want to shout out that I posted a new video on our second channel, Clickheads. Riot Games, the developer of League of Legends, is developing a class-based FPS that's sort of a mix between Overwatch and CSGO, and some former pro players have playtested it and gave their thoughts. Link in the description, or you can click the card on the screen. You can go over to that video to hear my thoughts on the development of that game, the direction it's going, and the strengths and weaknesses of its philosophy. The new game doesn't have a name yet. They're calling it Project A until they come up with a official name, but I'm pretty excited, and I do plan to cover that game as well on some channel. Not sure where yet, but if you wanted to get an intro into that game, head over to Clickheads and check it out. Other than that, guys, that's gonna be it for me. I've been Frito for your Overwatch. We'll see you guys next time. The barrier to entry to Project A seems quite a bit higher, but it's likely Riot looks to combat that by making the game free to play. But how that will be received by the casual audience is anybody's guess. Let's not forget that League itself dominated the MOBA market by being more approachable than Dota, and MOBA games dethroned the previous RTS king and StarCraft before it for similar reasons. The more approachable game has always won out in esports history thus far, and there's a chance that a free-to-play announcement from the likes of Overwatch's base game, likely around the time that the sequel for it would drop, could take the wind out of Project A's sails. At least